Oh, you already turned it on? Oh, that was prompt. Thank you. So, hi everybody, both here and online. I'm Chris, and this is the feast at St. Timothy's Episcopal Church in beautiful Henderson, Nevada. We get together here every Sunday at 5 p.m. for a brief service, and the live stream part is just the message. I'm also the head pastor here. Normally, we have sharings from members of the parish. In Churchill, that's called lay-led. It's lay preached, meaning not ordained. But tonight I'm going to do it, and all credit or blame should go to the chair of the board here, Mr. Tom Pittman, because he suggested a few months ago, while entertaining my wife and myself at his and Lonnie's house, over a margarita, I might add. I said, Chris, why don't you do the feast just every now and again? Was it 2 margaritas? Who, me? It's when to make a sale. So here I am for my first ever, I think, feast speech. Now, most people here know about me that I had a near-death experience, and I only bring this up because what's uncanny is people who've had near-death experiences always remark how similar they are when they hear somebody else talk about it. And I find that to be very similar, analogous to another situation, which is if you talk to people who have been in car wrecks, and people who've been in car wrecks will often say, very similar to a near-death experience, I expected it to be scarier than it was, but even as I saw the truck headed at me, I was somehow strangely relaxed about the whole thing of that whatever happens, happens. Que sera, sera. And it's an illogical, almost paradoxical peace that comes with it. And again, because in some ways, a trade of pastors are those more extreme moments in people's life, or the rare moment, the birth, the death, the marriage, the divorce, the difficult, including car wrecks and going to visit people at the hospital. And I'll hear again and again, like, wow, so I was coming up and seeing that I was getting ready to hit those little collapsible things right under the viaduct at 60, I thought, this is probably it for me. And then surprisingly, I thought, it's not scary. And here's another thing. A lot of people don't report pain. No matter how many bones they break, they'll say strangely that there was no pain involved. And so the reason I can hear all these stories is because I've had actually a whole raft of very similar stories, and I thought I would share a few with you. As you know, I've written a book, and in one of the chapters, I talk about how racing way at double the speed limit with my sister to go see Bruce Springsteen when he was still just a guy. He wasn't quite the boss yet. And we found on the night of the show in Miami, in Oxford, Ohio, where the Miami University is, there were still tickets left on the day of the show. So you know this was 1975 Bruce Springsteen. He was not the rock god yet he would become. But I knew he was. My sister did. We said, let's race on down there. And I went over the crest of a hill, flying probably between 100, 110, and probably closer to 110 on this country road. And everything would have been fine. And there was a farm road. They're like a lane and a quarter wide. They're very common in Ohio. And I realized the road dead-ended about from me to the glass, and I would have needed 40 times that to stop. And I can see exactly where the car would plow into the dirt and become an accordion with my dead sister and me in it. And somehow, magically, we ended up at the side of the road over here. And you think, well, that's crazy. I never would have shared this story with anybody if my very sane, rational, intellectual work for a newspaper as an editor sister hadn't witnessed it with me. It's the one absolutely, by the law of physics, impossible thing that ever happened to her. But before that, I had other things that were sort of equally impossible. And I guess I share them just because I see it as an abundance of God's generosity. And that maybe one of my missions in life is to tell people over and over again, don't be afraid. no matter what, the thing you're most likely to be afraid of, a scorpion, a snake, getting sick, the big one is dying. That's the umbrella category that people are afraid of. But being afraid of dying is a choice we don't have to make. And I would definitely encourage people to not. Because every time something extreme like that happens, God is never more present. And even if you fear some horrible thing like a scorpion bite, or, they say one of the most feared deaths is drowning. But everybody who's been revived from drowning says the exact opposite. I would have thought that's the worst way to go, and all I felt was peace, said the woman who was stuck under the waterfall for 20 minutes. You know about her? She has a lot of credibility because she's a real doctor. People like MDs, they think of them scientific and sane, which they often are. But anyway, I had another example of impossible, even before I was rescued from the flying AMC Pacer with my sister. Only 4 months earlier, I had fallen off a ladder, where I was about nearly as high as what would be right above these stained glass windows, and wasn't careful with my ladder standing, and then it was up like this, and I walked over the edge, which lifted the back of the ladder. And I remember going all the way down. It would probably been between 25 and 30 feet, thinking, I'm not going to survive this, particularly, it's funny, a second can be an hour, particularly because I'm falling backwards and my head's going to hit first. This will be it. But just like those stories I just told you, I was strange. It's like, oh, okay, well, we'll see what happens. And on the way down, you know how they say seconds can be hours? Literally, that happened. It's like I slowed down, I whacked my head, and that's all I remember. And it was quite a bit later before I could ever tell that story. Because what happened was my next conscious thing was in my bed, and my parents, who worked all the time, my dad's like home from work or whatever it was, 8:30 p.m. My mom's still at the office. He's like, Chris, are you okay? I said, yeah, why wouldn't it be? He goes, well, there's blood all over your head. There's blood all over the bed. There's blood, And we went from the trail of blood from where I was painting this house, at a colleague of his, actually. Apparently, after I hit the ground, I walked over to my 1974 Triumph Spitfire car, got in, drove it home, stopped at the red light at the very busy street that was across from the house, where I got in, parked the car. I apparently walked up, I don't remember literally one iota of this, took a shower, bled all over that, wrapped towels around me, and went to bed. But the reason I mention this is that at no point ever, even when my dad woke me up, did I ever feel like, whoa, that was a close one. Because I realized the whole time that kind of no matter what happens, we're so infinitely loved and protected. And of course, a lot of people just think, well, you were in shock, and in your shock, you were still conscious, you weren't drunk, so of course you got the car home. And I think, okay, I'm okay with that explanation. Explain it any way you want. But can I please still believe totally that there's this protective force of the universe that often gets called God, and that we have nothing to fear or worry about? Because you're not going to talk me out of that. And I think there's something persuasive about these stories. I have one more. Do you remember the first Garmin navigation things that you could stick on your windshield? And this was, back when they were invented, I thought it was cutting edge. And they're not traffic sensitive, correct? So if there were a traffic jam up ahead, the Garmin would still say, go straight down the street, and it would know there's a traffic jam, like my phone does now, and all of our phones do. And they'll reroute us, right, as soon as there's a quicker way around. But it wasn't like that 25 years ago. I would regularly drive from Jessup, Georgia, to the Jacksonville airport. It was about a 90-minute drive. And there were actually a lot of little turns because you came up the back way. It wasn't on the interstate way in the main entrance. There was this back route that saved about 15 miles. And there were so many turns I never bothered to memorize them. Why would I? I was a Garmin owner. Satellites actually guide me. Wow, was I impressed by that back then. Remember when this stuff was the stuff that made you feel awe of what a brilliant species we were? Now we just take it totally for granted, at least on some topics, we're a brilliant species. So many, many, many times, my Garmin had said drive down US 301, which was US 95 when there wasn't a US 95. It was US 301, the coastal route, along with Highway 1. And this, I'm wandering like I always do, and I'd always said, go whatever, 57 miles and make a left. So I wasn't particularly looking at it. I'm driving down, there's an intersection way off, and suddenly the Garmin says, go left, which it never, ever had. And even if the road had been closed, Garmin wouldn't have known it. So it was utterly impossible that it rerouted this. But I took my foot off the gas, and I think you'll already be not shocked to hear that I might have been a little above the speed limit. I took my foot off the gas to kind of look at the Garmin, like, what's that all about? So I'm 75, 70, 65, 60, almost to the speed limit, which was 55. And slowing down, and as I'm coming up with this intersection, suddenly one of those great big trucks that empties septic tanks, and it was clear, you could see the sloshing pulls right in front of me. And if I'd been going 75, I would have slammed right into it. And what a messy way to go. What an embarrassment. I mean, that would have been the worst obit in history. But I also think my friends would have enjoyed it. But as it turns out, it didn't happen because right as that truck pulled in front of me, I had, because I was going 20 miles an hour slower, because the Garmin did this thing it had never, ever done, and there's no explanation for this, so don't try to come up with a rational, logical, normal, scientific one. You've got to believe in the magic and miracle of God to really make this work. I'd slowed down enough, I could turn, just miss the back of the truck. I went kind of over the ditch, but it wasn't too pitched, and the car's going this way and that way. It goes over the road, down through another ditch, up into a gas station. And here's the other thing, I've had this happen twice, where in the middle of doing all this, I watched my hand on the steering wheel, and I was sort of like going, it looked like when the camera's behind the guy in NASCAR. But the thing is, I'm an average driver. And I'm watching my hand like, man, I'm a genius. But I didn't think that. I thought, a genius is driving the car, and it's not me. And the car, sort of went this way, and then that way, and then this way, and finally hit the gas station, sort of spun all the way around, and didn't even hit the gas pump. Kind of spun around one, and suddenly I was like, I'm going 3 miles an hour again. I didn't even come to a stop. I just drove out on the street, turned right again. I didn't make the left turn that Garmin had said to make. And I got on the road again, and Garmin said, go straight, just like it always did. The usual 50 miles and make the same left I'd made 30 different times. You get the difference that I'm talking about. Technologically, Garmin's never, ever varied. No street had been built. I hadn't updated the program. But these things happen to me. And sometimes people say, Chris, what makes you think, what is it that makes you so special? My explanation of that is exactly the opposite. I think, the reason God keeps me around is in some ways rooted in a denseness. That it takes strong messages frequently repeated more than once, sometimes far more than once, before I get the message. So to the contrary, for instance, in my book, there's a lot of these little sort of miraculous experiences, and my oldest friend gave it to one of his friends. He goes, you don't actually believe, Steve, that anything that kind of miraculously good happens to anybody. And that was his explanation, and my friend said to him, some people might need all that. My friend knows me well. He didn't say, oh, he's a man of exceptional faith and prayer. If I pray a lot now, it's just because I have been given no choice whatsoever in the matter. It's just simply a completely natural response to my life, just like every person here is doing exactly what your life has bid you to do. We're all naturally, wisely, with maturity, responding to the circumstances and events of our life, right? So it's as simple as that. But if I'm then an expert on these crazy happenings, I guess I do want to say again what I think one of the messages is is I'm still here because one, maybe the only thing I'm supposed to be saying is that there is this loving, benevolent force in the universe, and don't underestimate how protective that benevolent force can be. I say everybody here, there's a time when they're going to need to see that that thing that scared them doesn't. If they want to feel more, that when you most need to feel protected, you will. So right now, you can relax and quit worrying about things. And that is my message for tonight. Thanks for listening.